So I got bombarded right at the beginning of the game. Usually was out pretty quickly because I wasn't the most athletic, and I was usually the target of all those jocks and everything. But as I got older, I began to enjoy the game more, especially when you played with people that weren't out to play kill ball, but they were out to play dodgeball. There's a big difference between kill ball and dodgeball. And it's just kind of a fun game. And we as adults, we don't get to play that stuff anymore as much as we did as kids. And so I hope that we'll have a good time with that tonight as well. But you know, one of the things in life is kind of like dodgeball. In dodgeball, the difficult thing is when everybody is aiming at you. You can deal with maybe one or two or something like that. Brother Ansner, would you come up here? You can help me out with an illustration. And come on up here. And, you know, in life, all of you face these situations, and we get out in the world, and we get bombarded sometimes by the world and the things of the world. And when it's just one thing, it's not so bad. So, Esther, stand right over here if you would. And, Brother Al, I want you to throw a ball at him and see how good he's at dodging it. See if you can dodge it now. Now get hit. Here we go. Ready? Oh, man, he's no good. But that's only one. What happens if it's two at the same time? Brother Al and Brother Sears, let's have you both go at the same time here. Ready? On a count of three. 1, 2, 3. Oh, man, he's not doing too good. Let's try 3 at one time, all right? So, Brother Al, Brother Sears, and Brother Shane, you guys all at the same time here. Let's see how well you can do. All right, you ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Oh, all right. Now, that's not too bad, but what if everybody threw a ball right now? Go ahead. Everybody at the same time. Here we go. Ready? All right. You can sit down, Ansner. Now, here's the thing. No more throwing balls. All right. Here's the thing. It's kind of like life, isn't it? In life, you can handle one thing. You can handle maybe even 2 or 3. But then it seems like there's some days it just comes from every direction all at once. And you're just bombarded again and again and again. And that's what I want to talk about today. Look at Genesis chapter 39. You're familiar with the story. It's the story of Joseph. He's been sold into slavery. And now he is being taken on as a slave in Potiphar's house. Verse number 1, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt. And Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house and all that he had put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. He left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person, well favored. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in his house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. And it came to pass when she saw that he left his garment in her hand and was fled forth. And it goes on from there. But what I want to focus on is verse number 10. Verse number 10, it says, and came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day. It just didn't let up. It just constant. She kept constantly come back again and again and again. And that's the way life is. We get bombarded with things. Sometimes it seems like they're all at one time, or it's just over and over and over and over and over again. Day by day, we struggle with some of the same things. One of the things that we all as men struggle with, and one of the things that it seems like in today's world especially, we're bombarded with every day, day in and day out, and that's this area of lust. Turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 6. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. I do not believe there's a man in this room that does not struggle with that at times. And all of us, we understand what I'm talking about when you're bombarded by it. It seems like everywhere you turn, it's on the TV, it's on the internet. You just go on the internet, do a simple search, and all of a sudden, boom, there it is. You get it when you turn on the TV. It doesn't matter what program you turn on today, it's there. You go out into the mall or into the store, anywhere, and you got women walking by you that are half dressed and exposing parts of the body that they have no business exposing to you and I, but they do that. And it just seems like everywhere we turn, we're bombarded with this area of lust. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and beginning with verse number 12, it says, all things are lawful unto me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Meat for the belly, and the belly for meats, but God shall destroy both it and them. Now the body is not for fornication, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. One of the arguments you hear from people, well, God made me this way. He made me with an appetite. When I'm hungry, I eat. He made me with a sexual appetite, so I just fulfill that. That's not an argument that holds any weight with God. But verse 14, and God hath both raised up the Lord, and will also raise us up by his own power. Know ye not that your bodies are the members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make the members of a harlot? God forbid. What? Know ye not that they which are joined to a harlot is one body? For two saith he, shall be one flesh, but he that is joined unto the Lord is one spirit. Flee fornication. The word fornication, by the way, is the word porneia. Flee fornication. Every sin that a man doeth is without the body, but he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body. God right here signals out the sin of fornication as a unique sin. Now, all sin is sin. If you've broken one law, you're guilty of all. James chapter 4 tells us that. But at the same time, there are different consequences to sin. Different sins have different consequences. And God says there's a unique consequence to the sin of fornication, whether it's actually committing fornication or adultery or pornography. And then verses 19, 20, very familiar verse. What? Know ye not that your body is a temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which you have of God, and you are not your own, for you're bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and your spirit, which are God's. Now, those two verses are ones we quote quite often, but in context specifically, they're talking about the area of pornography and the area of sexual sin, the area of lust that we struggle with. And all of us as men, and even the young men in this room, understand and know what that struggle is, because we're bombarded with it day in and day out. There's hardly a day goes by. You go in the store and it's there. You turn on the TV, it's there. You turn on the internet, it's there. You walk down the street, it's there. And we're bombarded with the temptation of all these things over and over and over again. You know, when many of us were younger, especially back in my generation, pornography was something that was there, but it was hard to find. It was not prominent, and if you wanted to look at pornography, you had to go to a place in a back alley somewhere, or you had to. It just wasn't there very much. You could find it, but it was very difficult to find. Today, pornography looks for you. It looks for me. It's just there day after day after day after day. We're bombarded with this area of pornography and the sexual temptation. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 16, it says, all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And we need to understand there's three areas that we're tempted in this area of pornography. And the first one is the lust of the flesh. We have this battle even against my own flesh. In Matthew chapter 26 and verse number 41, it says, watch and pray that you enter not into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And we struggle with the flesh because we're built as men to desire to have sex, and we're built as men with this desire to look at women, and we struggle with that flesh. God gave it to us as a good thing within marriage, but sin has corrupted it, and we all struggle with that flesh that desires that sexual satisfaction, whether it's the actual intercourse or whether it's the pornography or whatever it is. We struggle with that area. In Romans chapter 7 and verses 18 and 19, Paul says this. He says, for I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing, for the will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. For the good that I would, I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. Pornography, fornication is, as I said, unique among all sins. It's a struggle within our own flesh. We deal with that over and over again, and we need to understand that it's a challenge for us just from the fleshly point of view. I read one study that said the average man thinks about sex 19 times a day. There's even a study that says the average man thinks about sex every 7 seconds. I don't think that's true. I think it's a little extreme, and it's hard to actually quantify that. How do you quantify what somebody thinks about? But they've done different studies, and I believe that probably that 19 times a day is pretty accurate. We struggle with this because it's part of our makeup. It's part of our DNA. It's part of who we are as men. And we struggle with that fleshly desire, and we struggle with the temptations of the flesh. The studies also said the only things we think about more than sex is food and sleep. And we have that struggle in that area. And so the lust of the flesh, and it seems like just within our own flesh, without the outside temptations, it's a struggle, because even within our own thoughts, within our own heart, within our own bodies, we struggle with this desire and this need that is built into us as men. And then we have the lust of the eyes. We're constantly visually assaulted in today's world. Turn over to Matthew chapter 5 and verses 27 through 29. Matthew chapter 5 and verses 27 through 29. I stopped by the store the other day, and I was thinking of working on this message, and I'd standing in line there to check out, and I looked around me, and there was at least 5 different visual sexual temptations right there in that line at the store. There was 5 different places where I could look and see pictures and see things that were screaming out to me to cause me to have lust in my heart. And we go out in the world today. You turn on the TV, you look at the internet, anywhere you go, it's there, and we're being visually assaulted. And I don't know about you, but I try to turn my eyes away from it. I learned a long time ago it's good to, what one author said, to bounce your eyes, just to turn away from that visual assault in that way. I do that not only for myself, but I also do it for my wife. When you as a husband, when you do one of these things and look at a girl like this, what you're telling your wife is that she is not good enough. That she does not satisfy you, and you need to look at this other visual picture, whether it's on the internet, TV, or whether it's on the internet, or whether it's in real life. You're telling her she's not enough. I need to look at this girl as well. And so I try to make it a habit when it comes on TV or in any other situation to turn away from it. But my problem is when it comes on TV, I'll switch the channels, and the channel I turn to is worse than the one I was on. My problem is that when you're on the internet, you click off one thing and you're right to another thing. My problem is that when you're walking down the street and you turn away from one girl, you look over here and this one's worse than the one you turned away from. And it's just everywhere, and you're bombarded with it again and again and again. Everywhere you go, it's the same temptation. In Matthew chapter 5 and verses 27 through 29, it says, "You have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell." Folks, we need to get drastic about this thing about what we look at. Some of you maybe need to get rid of some of your cable TV programs. And some of you need to put on your computer some controls. And you need to get drastic about it. I don't want to see you plucking your eyes out, because I'd have a church full of blind men. That's the reality of the world we live in, because it's everywhere around us. And the only way you can stop it is to pluck your eyes out. But it's not just the eyes, it's all of our senses are being assaulted. And we need to understand that we've got to deal with this in a very drastic way, because we're being bombarded day in and day out and day in and day out. Turn over to Proverbs chapter 6. Proverbs chapter 6, and look at verses 24 through 29. Proverbs chapter 6 and verse number 24, "To keep thee from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman. Lust not after her beauty in thine heart, neither let her take thee with her eyelids. For by means of a whorish woman a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one go upon hot coals and his feet not be burned? So he that goeth to his neighbor's, into his neighbor's wife, whosoever touches her shall not be innocent. And we need to realize we cannot look. We cannot indulge our senses. We cannot go to those places on the internet. We cannot watch those TV programs. You can't play the video games with the explicit pictures in it. You can't allow it. You're going to be bombarded with it. And that's the problem. Day in and day out and day in and day out. We struggle with the flesh already. And then we're bombarded with our senses. And then it's the pride of life. The pride of life. Go over to Job chapter 31. The book of Job chapter 31. The pride of life is when we're mentally challenged. Now, I know some of you are mentally challenged here, but that's not what I'm talking about. The idea of the pride of life is different. With the lust of the flesh, what we can do with the lust of the flesh is we can combat it by, first of all, fulfilling the need of our flesh in the way God intended. If I'm drinking water, I'm not tempted to go out and buy a soda, which is not good for me. I preach the big gulp message and talk about that. And when I meet my flesh needs in the right way. Now, sometimes you're not able to do that, especially in the area of sexual temptation, because maybe you're not married or you're away from your wife and your spouse, and you have that challenge with it. Then I find when I'm busy, I don't get hungry. You know, if I'm doing nothing, I'm hungry by 11 o'clock or even 10:30. Even if I had a big breakfast, if I'm sitting around doing nothing, I'm hungry right away. But if I'm busy, I can go 12, 1, 2, 3 o'clock and not be hungry. And it's to stay busy doing the things that we ought to do and to meet the needs of your flesh in the way God intended. The lust of the eyes, we can control that to a certain extent by controlling our environment, where we go. There's certain places I know if I go there, I'm going to be tempted. There's certain things if I turn on, I'm going to be tempted, and I can control my environment. I can put the computer out where everybody can see it. I can put controls on my TV or get rid of the cable TV, and I control the lust of the eyes. But the pride of life is a hard one. The Bible says in Job chapter 31 and verse number 1, it says that Job says, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a mate? And then in verse number 7, it says, if my step had turned out of the way, and my heart hath walked after mine eyes, and if any blot have cleaved to my hands. You see, the pride of life is that attitude of you deserve a break today. The attitude of you only go around once in life. The attitude is you ought to have it your way. And the pride of life thinks that I can handle it, that I'm different. It won't affect me the same way it does everybody else. And the only way really to deal with the pride of life is by being where I need to be with the Lord. Job made a covenant with his eyes. I'm not going to look at this. The pride of life attitude is, well, everybody else is doing it. You know, the whole world, it seems like everybody you work with, they look at porn and they're out doing all kinds of things. And it seems like every TV program you turn on, everybody lives this lifestyle. And sometimes you think, well, everybody else is doing it. Why can't I have some fun in life too? Or sometimes it's curiosity. You get on the internet and you're just curious about that article, that Facebook thing or whatever else it is, and you click on it, and that curiosity just to see. And that's what the world knows, and that's why the world's throwing these things out to you. You go stand in the line at the store, and you got the Cosmopolitan magazine telling you about the latest sex techniques or whatever else like that. It's the curiosity factor. It feeling like you're left out. That's the pride of life. And I deserve this. And the only way to deal with that is by getting your walk with the Lord. As I said last night, we need to have the negative, but it's more important to have the positive. Because if you have the positive, the negative is going to happen. If you have the negative, the positive is going to happen. And so we need to have that positive attitude with the Lord. But we're bombarded with the lusts of with lust over and over again, day in and day out. And then another thing we're bombarded with is with time. I don't know about you, but it seems like I'm just be constantly bombarded with, I need this time and I need that time and all the time challenges in my life. There's so many conflicting demands on your time. In Ephesians 5:16, it says, redeeming the time because the days are evil. And there are days it just seems like, man, I'm being bombarded. This person wants my time, and work wants my time, and my family wants my time, and the Lord wants my time, and now my car's broken down, Brother Larry, and all these things, all these time demands, day in and day out. And it seems like we don't have time to read our Bible. In Psalms 119, verse 97, it says, oh, how I love thy law. It is my meditation all the day. But it seems like we can go a whole day without time to read our Bible. Oh, we don't have time to pray. In James chapter 4, verse 2, it says, you have not because you ask not. Verse 3, it says, you ask and receive not because you ask amiss. When we do get around to praying, it's because we're desperate, instead of really spending time and talking to the Lord, because we don't have time to pray, or we don't have time to serve the Lord. In Joshua 24:15, it says, to seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And it seems like I just never have time to serve the Lord. I'm just so busy at work, and I'm so busy at home. I'm so busy with this and that and the other thing, that there's no time to serve the Lord. There's no time to go out soul winning. There's no time to go and help out at the church. It just seems like we never have time to serve the Lord. Or it's time for our family. In 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8, it says, but if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than infidel. And it seems like we get so busy with everything else, we don't have time to spend with our children. We don't have time to spend with our wife. When's the last time you took time to go on a date with your wife? When's the last time you took time to be with your kids and to spend some quality time with them? And not only quality, but quantity. I don't think you can have quality without quantity. And, take it from a guy that all his kids are grown up. The thing I wish the most is I wish I could go back and spend time with my children. I preached a message a while back. I was cleaning out my garage, and I found this kite, a brand new kite in the package still. And I brought it to church, and I preached a message on it because I bought that kite to go flying with my two boys. Now, can you imagine me going to Caleb today and saying, Caleb, let's go fly a kite together? Do you think he'd be real excited about that? There's no time anymore. Now, Joshua maybe, but not Caleb, not Ben. Because I never got around to having time to do that. And I regret that. And it seems like there's so many demands on our time. What do I spend my time doing? There's so many distractions as well. Got that TV program I want to watch. And I get on the internet. I don't know about you, but I can get on the internet and spend hours on there just clicking from one thing to the other. Or you got video games. Boy, what a time distraction that is. And I talk to so many people, they don't have time to serve the Lord. They don't have time to read their Bible. They don't have time to pray, but they have time to play a video game. And video games, or you got these projects you got to do. It's not all bad stuff. I don't know about you, but I have these projects. On Monday, my wife's gone, and on Monday, I had to take the day off on Monday, and our sink in the bathroom was leaking, and I thought, well, I'm going to fix the sink. And then I started looking at it, and I said, my wife's always wanted a new vanity in the bathroom, so I looked on Craigslist, and I found the new vanity for $80. So I said, well, if I'm going to fix the sink, I'll just go ahead and put a new vanity in. And so I went down, bought the vanity, and then I had to go buy a sink to put on top of the vanity, and then I had to buy new plumbing to put onto the sink, and then I'm looking around and say, well, if I'm gonna do all this, I pulled the vanity out, and the wall behind it was really all messed up with gecko droppings and all kinds of junk, and I thought, well, I better paint, and if I'm gonna paint behind the sink, I might as well paint the whole wall, and then I'm looking at the floor and said, well, maybe I should put new tile on the floor, and boy, this little project became a whole day, and then the sink I bought from Home Depot to put on top of the vanity, when I got it all together, it was leaking. And I'm trying to figure out, why is it leaking? I spent hours trying to fix the leak and finally determined the sink had a defect in it. And it was the sink itself that had a defect. I had to take it back to Home Depot, take the whole thing apart, take it back to Home Depot, and put the whole thing back together. My morning job, my morning project became a 2-day project, and actually 3 or 4 days, I'm still not done. And isn't that what it is with time? Man, it's just boom, 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 boom. And on top of that, I got to clean the house because I got everybody coming over on Thursday night and got to get these messages done. I'm preaching 2 extra messages, an extra lesson this week, and I've got to get all that done. And man, it's just boom, 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 boom. Just bombarded me day in, day out with the time and all the distractions and everything. Even works that way. It's not always the bad things. But it's just all the demands on our time. It seems like it's relentless. And then we get bombarded with things costing money. 1 Timothy chapter 6. Some of you just took the Dave Ramsey course. And I imagine you're like, well, just about everybody takes the course. As soon as you get done with the course, all of a sudden, there's all these new bills that show up. and all these new expenses that show up and all these things you got to spend. You're trying to pay your debt. You're trying to save money for the future. And now, boom, you got this expense. Now, boom, you got this cost. Now, boom, you got the other thing there. And it just seems like there's so many demands on our money. It seems like it never stops. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verses 6 through 10, it says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing to this world, and certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let's be there with content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and in many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. You know, it's just the demands on our money. It just seems like every time we turn around, there's a new bill to pay. It seems like every time we turn around, there's no money to pay our tithes and to pay the offerings. And then we got to save up for the future. And then, of course, you got to have the latest and the greatest. You got to have the new iPhone. The iPhone 7's come out now. The iPhone 8's coming out soon. And I've got the iPhone 6. And that's just, you can't live with the iPhone 6 anymore. You know, you got to have the next one up the line. You got to have the new computer. You got to have the new printer. You got to have the new this or new that. And it just seems like there's so many demands day after day on our money. And then it's responsibilities. Man, all kinds of demands on my responsibilities. I got my job. I want to do a good job. I want to be able to advance. I want to be able to make more money. You got all the demands that come with your job. Then you got a family. You got all the demands that come with a family and raising kids and taking care of your home and taking care of your wife. And it seems like, I don't know about you, but it seems like every day I come home, my wife says, okay, you got to do this, you got to do that, and you got to do the other thing. You know, my wife is working here at the church now. She's the finance secretary, and so she comes in most days and works. And you know, back when our kids were still at home, she was a stay-home mom, and I like that. Because I could come home from work and I could lay on the couch and watch the news while she made dinner, while she took care of all the cleaning and everything else. Now I come home and I've got to help. I got to help. I don't like this. I want her to quit, but her boss won't let her quit. Yeah, I don't like this, all the demands of my time. You come home and I'm tired now. Well, you can help make dinner? Now, I can't say, well, you make dinner if she's been working just as hard as I did. You can help wash the dishes. You can take the garbage out. That's one of the jobs I hate. That used to be my boy's job, and now they're not there anymore. Caleb's living downstairs, and I can't get him to take the garbage out. He won't come up and take my garbage out. I got to do that. You know, all the demands on our time and our responsibilities, and now I got more responsibility. And then the pastor comes and says, will you do this or will you do that? All the demands. I don't know about you, but it feels like I'm playing dodgeball. Dodgeball with that lust. Dodgeball with my time. All the demands of my time. Dodgeball with all the responsibilities I have in my family. Dodgeball with all the money challenges that are there. So how do you deal with that? Well, how did Joseph deal with it? Joseph, it says back in Genesis chapter 39, it says that day by day, she kept coming back again and again and again. It never let up. It never stopped. Again and again and again. How did he deal with it? Well, the first thing is, you need to remember the Lord is with you. Look at Genesis chapter 39, verse number 1. It says, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of the house of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, and the Egyptian bought him at the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And moved down to verse 2. It says, and the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. He was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. The Lord was with Joseph. Look at verse number 21. It says, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Even in his prison, the Lord was with him. I think one of the things that's important to remember is that God is with you. Now, Joseph was sold into slavery. God was still with him. Joseph was thrown into prison. God was still with him. And whatever life throws at you, God is still with you. He will never leave us nor forsake us. Joshua chapter 1. Joshua chapter 1, you're I think you're very familiar with verse number 8. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. But look verse 9. Have not I commanded thee? Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. For the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. God is with you. Now, if you don't spend time with God, it doesn't feel like he's with you. If you're not spending time in the Word, if you're not spending time meditating upon the Word of God, then it's not going to feel like God's with you. My wife's on the mainland. She's not with me right now, and I'm mad at her. I got married to have a wife around. She's not going to be around for 10 more days. That's not hard. That's not easy. It's hard. It's a lot easier when she's there with me. You know what? Life is easier to deal with when you realize that God is with you and you're with him. Joseph remembered that the Lord is with him. In Hebrews chapter 13 and verse number 5, it says, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have. For you said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. You know, Joseph's attitude could have been this. If this is what it means, God with me, I don't want it. He's a slave. He could have had the attitude, yeah, God's with me. Look where I am. In verse 21, he's a prisoner now. God's with me? I don't want it. That could have been his attitude. He could have stepped back and said, I don't want this. I want something better. You know, sometimes our problem is we think we deserve better than we have. Well, I deserve that promotion that guy got. Why can't I have the house that this guy has? Why can't I have the car that they have? Sometimes it's why can't I have the wife that looks like that? That's one of the biggest temptations, I think, of the pornography is we look at the pornography and says, why can't my wife look like that? And the covetousness. Instead of being content with what we have. Joseph was a prisoner, a slave. Joseph was a prisoner, and yet he remembered that God is with him. And he didn't covet something different. He just said, this is where God has me. God never leaves me nor forsakes me. He's with me. I'm going to make the best of my situation. You see, don't get bitter, get better. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. Look at verse 15 through 17. Looking diligently, as lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person, as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For you know how that afterwards, when he would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears. See, the problem, a lot of us, is why we give in to all that bombardment is because we're bitter. We're bitter about our situation. We're bitter about what life has brought us. And I'll tell you what, Joseph, betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, everything he did for Potiphar, and then he's cast into prison. He interpreted the dreams of the two men in prison, and they forgot all about him. Don't you think at some point Joseph could have gotten bitter? And the reason a lot of us are struggling is because of our bitterness. Because we don't feel like we got what we deserved, or we feel like we don't deserve what we got. You see, our purpose is to do right wherever we are. It says Joseph did well in the house of Potiphar. He was a slave, but he did what was right. Daniel chapter 1 and verse number 8, it says, Daniel purposed his heart not to defile himself. There's a young man taken away from his home country, probably watched his parents and his family killed in front of his eyes, has been castrated, and yet he purposed his heart to do what's right. Folks, we need to purpose in our heart we're going to do what's right. He maintained a good testimony. We read Genesis chapter 39 and verses 3 through 5. You see that he had a great testimony. Everything he did it well. He did the best of his ability. Colossians chapter 3, verse 17 says, whatsoever you do it heartily. I'm sorry, Colossians 3:17. I'm thinking of 23. I'll get to that in just a minute. Colossians 3:17. It says, and whatsoever you do, word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by him. Verse number 23, and whatsoever you do it heartily as to men, as the Lord and not to men, knowing that the Lord you shall receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Jesus Christ. But he that doeth wrong shall receive for the wrong which he hath done, and there is no respect of person. Do you understand Colossians 3:17-23 when you read them in context? He's talking about in your family, in your workplace. You know, you guys at work are serving the Lord. You're not serving the military. You're not serving your boss. You're serving the Lord. Potiphar was a slave master. And yet Joseph understood, I'm serving God. Had a great testimony, maintained a good testimony. And here's the other thing I think is important. Look at verse number 6. He left all that he had in Joseph's hand. He knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. I think Joseph did not believe his own publicity. The Bible says there's three terms used here. A goodly person, well favored. It's basically saying he was smart. We know that from the previous verses. He was talented. We know that from the previous verses. He had a good body. The phrase there where it says was a goodly person, he had a good body. He was in good shape. And it says that he was well favored is the idea that he was good looking. He just had everything going for him. And he could have gotten kind of proud and kind of cocky, but he didn't believe his own publicity. He was a humble man. In Romans 12:3 it says, for I say through the grace given unto me to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God had dealt to every man the measure of faith. He understood everything he was given to him by God. He very easily, you know, when a woman starts showing you attention, that's flattering. But he didn't take that and run with it. He humbled himself. He knew his abilities. Turn over to Galatians chapter 6. Humbling ourselves is not false humility. False humility says, oh, I'm nothing special when you think you are. You see, God has made us to be the man that we are. And God's given you certain talents and certain abilities, and that's, praise God for those talents and abilities. And Daniel understood his talents and abilities. He was not afraid to use them. In Galatians chapter 6 and verses 3-5, it says, for if man think himself to be something, when he's nothing, he deceives himself. But let every man prove his own work, and then shall he rejoice in himself alone, not another, for every man shall bear his own burden. See, Joseph knew what he was, but he didn't believe his own publicity. Joseph humbled himself. He didn't lift himself up. I think the first thing is we need to remember the Lord is with us. I think the second thing is you need to remember that your sin affects others. When Joseph was tempted by Potiphar's wife, he said, I can't do this because it would be a sin against God and it would be a sin against my master. Men, we need to understand your sin doesn't just affect you. First of all, we need to understand that we'll get caught. Numbers chapter 32 and verse 23 says, but if you will not do so, behold, you have sinned against the Lord. Be sure your sin will find you out. And I think one of the reasons that Daniel did not sin is he knew that sooner or later I'm going to get caught. You may be getting away with your sin. Maybe your wife doesn't know about it, and your family doesn't know about it, and your pastor doesn't know about it, but you know what? God knows about it. And Joseph understood that. You're not going to get away with your sin. And he knew he would pay for his sin. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9, it says, be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap. And after 61 years of life, I can tell you for sure, you will pay for your sins. It may not be immediate. It may not be today or tomorrow, but it's going to come. Joseph understood that his sin was against God. David said in Psalms chapter 51, against thee and thee only have I sinned and done this great evil in thy sight. And he understood, if I do this, my sin is against God. And something else we need to understand as men is when we sin, generations pay for our sin. Look at Psalms 115. You do what's right and generations will praise you. You do what's wrong and generations will curse you. Psalms 115 and verse number 17. Psalms 115. Verse number 17. The dead praise not the Lord, neither, and that's not the verse I want. I wrote down the wrong reference here. But Let's see if it's verse number 7 there. I'll have to look that up. But basically what it says in Psalms, where the right place to be at, is that Israel was blessed because of Joseph's choices. He made the right choices, and the generations of a nation were blessed because of that. You've got a choice, men. What you do, and young men, listen to me now. What you do now, before you have children, is going to affect your children for generations to come. In Exodus chapter 34, it tells us there that for the third and the fourth generation, you think you're getting away with looking at that pornography? Your boys are going to pay the price for you looking at it. The next generation is going to pay for it. And the generation after that, and the generation after that. And Joseph understood that. And that's how he could hold out against that day after day after day. How do you keep from clicking on that internet? Because I don't want my kids and my grandkids to pay for my sin. How do you keep from looking at that woman? Same reason. How do you stay faithful to the Lord? Because you know the next generation is going to pay for your sin. I can guarantee it. Joseph understood he needed to avoid temptation. Look at Proverbs chapter 4. Proverbs chapter 4. Verses 14 through 16. It says, enter not in the path of the wicked, go not in the way of evil men. Avoid it, pass not by it, turn from it, and pass away. For they sleep not, except they have done mischief, and their sleep is taken away, unless they cause some to fall. Proverbs chapter 7, verses 7 and 8. And behold, among the simple ones, I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding, passing through the street near her corner, and he went the way to her house. See, Joseph understood, I got to avoid this. Day after day, he says, I'm not going to go in the house when she's there by herself. I'm not going to get around her. I'm going to avoid her as much as I could. And you need to understand, if you want to have the victory, you got to avoid those places on the internet. You got to avoid those TV programs. You got to avoid going to certain places. You got to stay away from it. Avoid temptation. Don't listen to it. Man, day after day, it says in Genesis chapter 39, day after day, she kept coming back and saying, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And you're going to hear this over and over. And don't listen to the world. Don't listen to what they're saying. It's interesting. Look at verse 10. Genesis chapter 39, verse 10. It came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her. Now listen, to lie by her or to be with her. You see, it says to lie by her or be with her. Now, to be with her means to have sexual relationship with her. To lie by her is just to spend time with her. See, a lot of us, we justify our sin because I'm not going all the way. I'm not committed adultery with that woman, but I'm just talking to her about a lot of things I shouldn't be talking to her about. I just go to lunch with her once a week. I don't commit fornication. I just look at the pictures. In Romans chapter 1, it gives us a whole list of sins, and the last one is those that take pleasure in them that do them. I mean, Pastor, I don't do anything wrong, but I watch it. See, Joseph understood going part way is as bad as going all the way. Don't start down that path. Don't head in that direction, because it will entice you. It's James chapter 1. It's like that lure that's going to pull you in, and it's going to pull you in deeper and deeper. You know, a lot of people, the pornography they start with is Sports Illustrated. I'm not looking at real nudity. It's just they're covered, less and less, but they're covered. I read Sports Illustrated, the swimsuit edition for the sports articles. And before you know it, you're looking at the hardcore pornography. You see, we get drawn in there. And Joseph understood, I've got to avoid situations. And in verse 11, it says, it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. If Joseph made any mistake, it was this one. He got in the wrong place at the wrong time where there's no other men around. Fellas, I'm going to tell you this. You're going to end up in a mess. Not just with pornography, but all these other areas I've talked about, if you don't have some men around you. In Hebrews chapter 10, it says, provoking one another into love and to good works. And if you don't have a group of men that are coming around you there, not just once in a while we have a men's fellowship, but I mean day after day and week after week. If you don't have men that are checking up on you, holding you accountable, you are going to get, sooner or later, you're going to mess up. Even somebody like Joseph, he did all the right things, but one time he went in the house when there was no other men around, and that's when he got in trouble. And when you are not having that accountability relationship, you're going to end up in a mess. Joseph understood that at some point you just have to run. You have to flee. 1 Timothy 6:11, 2 Timothy 2:22, flee also youthful lusts. Flee these things, but follow after. Do the positive, not just the negative. And finally, Joseph understood you got to stay faithful. Do you know how long it was after he was sold to slavery that he finally settled things with his brothers? 51 years. Do you know how long he was a slave? About 8 years. Do you know how long he was in prison? 2 or 3 years. He just said, I got to stay faithful. Go over to Job, and we'll look at just 2 verses, and we'll close. Job chapter 1. Job is another one that just had to remember the Lord's with me no matter what happens. Look what it says about Job in chapter 1, verse 22. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Look at Job chapter 2 and look at verse number 10. But he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of the God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Joseph sin with his lips. Or Job. You know, God's gracious. Because if you read the entire book of Job, Job didn't do so well. He complained. He whined. He got mad. But God in his grace still gave him credit. Because Job did figure out God is faithful. Despite my situation, despite what's happened, God is faithful. That's what Joseph understood through 8 years of slavery, through 2 or 3 years of prison, through all the responsibility. Yeah, he got to be the second in command of Egypt, but he had all the responsibility involved with that. He had to get them ready for a famine. I know that wasn't easy. And then it came time he could have had revenge, and he chose not to. Because God is faithful. Man, sometimes life feels like Ensner up here being bombarded left and right. I don't know about you, but it just seems like everywhere I turn, lust. It seems like my time, there's always more demands on my time than I have time. Money, every time I think I've got it together, some new bill comes up. Something else I have to spend money on. Responsibility, man, it never ends. But if you learn the lessons of Joseph, you'll get through it. Let's bow in prayer.